What is the true cost of kindness? For Ethan Grant, a single father struggling to keep his world from collapsing, the answer was almost everything he had. One sunny afternoon, a simple act of compassion, sharing his last sandwich with a lonely little girl in a park, should have been a footnote in his day. Instead, it lit a fuse. That single desperate choice, born from the goodness of his heart, would unleash a storm he could never have predicted, orchestrated by one of the most powerful and secretive women in the country. This is the story of how half a sandwich nearly cost a man his daughter, his reputation, and his future, and how that same act of kindness became his only salvation. The sun on Tuesday, May 14th, was deceptively cheerful. It warmed the worn wooden slats of the park bench where Ethan Grant sat, but it couldn't touch the chill of dread that had settled deep in his bones. Beside him, his 6-year-old daughter Chloe hummed a tuneless song, her small legs kicking back and forth, not quite reaching the ground. Her world was the bright green of the freshly cut grass, the brilliant blue of the sky, and the promise of the playground swings. Ethan's world had shrunk to the numbers on a stack of unopened envelopes at home. Red for overdue, pink for final notice. He was a freelance architect, a good one, but the industry was in a slump. A major commercial project he'd poured 6 months of his life into had been shelved indefinitely last month, taking with it the final substantial payment he'd been counting on. Since then, it had been a frantic scramble for small jobs, a deck design here, a garage conversion there, but they were drops in an ocean of debt. The savings he and his late wife Jenna had built were gone vaporized by 2 years of her aggressive cancer treatment and the brutal aftermath of her passing. Now there was just him, Chloe, and the terrifyingly thin buffer between them and true destitution. "Daddy, can we get ice cream after the park?" Chloe asked, her voice full of innocent hope. Ethan's heart constricted. The $5 in his wallet had to last until Friday, when a small payment for a consultation was due to clear. $5 for 3 days, gas for the car, a carton of milk, maybe bread, definitely not ice cream. He forced a smile that felt like cracking plaster. "Not today, sweet pea. How about we make our own banana ice cream at home tonight? It's way better." The frozen banana thing. She scrunched up her nose but then brightened. "Okay. Can I put sprinkles on it?" "We'll find some sprinkles," he promised, making a mental note to check the back of the pantry. He prayed there were some left from her last birthday. It was lunchtime. From his worn backpack, he pulled out a single sandwich wrapped in wax paper. Turkey and Swiss on whole wheat. It was his sandwich. He'd already told Chloe he'd eaten a big breakfast, a lie she'd accepted without question. He'd learned to be a good liar about food. He handed it to her, but she shook her head, her brown pigtails bouncing. "Half, Daddy. We share." It was their rule, a habit formed in better times that had become a non-negotiable ceremony. He carefully tore the sandwich in two, making sure her half was slightly bigger, containing the perfect bite, with the corner of the cheese. As she ate, he took a slow sip from his water bottle, trying to convince his stomach it was full. That's when he saw the other little girl. She was sitting alone on the next bench, over partially hidden by a large lilac bush. She couldn't have been much older than Chloe, maybe 7 or 8. She was dressed in clothes that whispered expense, a navy blue pea coat that was too warm for the day, polished leather shoes, and a small, delicate silver bracelet on her wrist. But her posture was one of profound loneliness. She wasn't playing or waiting expectantly. She was just sitting, watching other families with an unnerving stillness, her gaze fixed and melancholic. Her hair was a cascade of dark, perfect curls, but her face was pale, and her eyes, a deep, stormy grey, seemed to hold the sadness of an old soul. Chloe finished with her, half noticed her, too. "Daddy, why is she all by herself?" "I don't know, honey. Maybe her mummy is close by." They watched for another 5 minutes. No one came. The girl didn't move except to pull her knees up to her chest, wrapping her arms around them. A low rumbling sound came from across the park. Ethan glanced at the girl's stomach and saw her flinch, slightly pressing a hand against it. Chloe's soft heart couldn't stand it. She slid off the bench and walked hesitantly toward the other girl. Ethan was right behind her, a protective hand hovering near her shoulder. "Hi, Chloe," said her voice, small. "My name's Chloe. What's yours?" The girl looked up, her grey eyes wide and startled as if surprised to be seen. "Rosalind," she whispered. Her voice was soft with a clipped, precise accent. "Are you hungry?" Chloe asked, because to a 6-year-old hunger was a primary and solvable problem. Rosalind looked down at her hands, then gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. Ethan's heart ached. He thought of the other half of the sandwich, his own meagre lunch. It wouldn't be enough, but it was something. He knelt down to Rosalind's level, making sure to keep his voice gentle. "Hey, Rosalind, I'm Ethan Chloe's dad. Is your mum or dad around?" She shook her head, her dark curls tumbling over her face. "My nanny, Mrs. Gable, is supposed to be watching me. But she was on the phone. She's always on the phone. I just walked away." There was no defiance in her voice, only a quiet weariness. "Well," Ethan said, making a quick decision. "We can't have you being hungry." He walked back to his bench and retrieved his half of the sandwich. He knelt before her again and held it out. "It's not much, but it's pretty good." "Turkey and Swiss." Rosalind's eyes widened, a flicker of disbelief in them. She looked from the sandwich to Ethan's face as if searching for a trick. She saw only Chloe's expectant smile and Ethan's open, honest expression. Hesitantly, she reached out with small, pale fingers and took the sandwich. "Thank you." She mumbled, her voice thick with emotion. She took a bite, and her eyes fluttered closed for a second, a look of pure relief washing over her face. For the next 10 minutes, the three of them sat in a companionable silence. Chloe chatted away, pointing out dogs and clouds, and Rosalind, slowly eating the sandwich as if it were a 5-course meal, began to thaw. A small, tentative smile even graced her lips when Chloe described the magic of frozen banana ice cream. The tranquility was shattered by a piercing shriek. Rosalind, oh thank God, Rosalind, a flustered woman in her late 50s, wearing a stiff grey uniform, came rushing toward them. Her face was a mask of panic and fury. This was clearly Mrs. Gable. She grabbed Rosalind's arm, pulling her up from the bench with a jerk. "Where have you been? I was about to call the police. And who is this man? What are you eating? Did he give that to you?" The questions came out in a torrent of accusation. Ethan stood up slowly, holding his hands up in a placating gesture. "Mum, it's all right. She was just sitting here. She said she was hungry, so I—" But Mrs. Gable wasn't listening. Her eyes, wide with fear, scanned Ethan's slightly frayed jeans, his 3-day-old stubble, and his worn-out t-shirt. She saw not a kind stranger, but a threat. A predator. "Stay away from her," she snapped, pulling Rosalind behind her skirt. "What did you want, money? You people are always preying on the innocent." The accusation hung in the air, sharp and ugly. "You people." Chloe shrank back, grabbing Ethan's leg. "That's not what happened at all," Ethan said, his voice firm but quiet, trying not to escalate in front of the children. "My daughter and I were just sharing our lunch." Mrs. Gable was already dialing her phone, her thumb jabbing at the screen. "I'm calling my employer. And the police. You'll be sorry you ever came near her." Rosalind tried to speak up. "Nanny, no. He was nice. I was hungry." "Hush, Rosalind. You don't know what dangers are out there. The nanny hissed her voice, trembling. She spoke into the phone, her words low and urgent. "Ma'am, I have her. She's safe. There was a man. I don't know, he looks homeless. He gave her something to eat. We're at the east entrance of Crestwood Park. Please hurry." Ethan felt a cold knot form in his gut. This was spinning out of control. He took Chloe's hand. "Come on, sweet pea. Let's go." He wasn't going to wait around for the police to arrive and question him like a criminal in front of his daughter. As they walked away, he could feel Mrs. Gable's suspicious gaze burning into his back. He glanced over his shoulder one last time. Rosalind was watching him go, the last bite of the sandwich clutched in her hand. Her grey eyes filled with a helpless, heart-breaking apology. Geneviève Dubois' office was on the 88th floor of the Dubois Capitol Tower, a spire of black glass and steel that pierced the city's skyline. Her world was one of calculated silence, broken only by the quiet hum of the climate control system and the muted chime of her private line. From this vantage point, the city below was a schematic, a collection of assets and liabilities. People were data points on a risk assessment chart. Emotion was a variable to be controlled, a weakness to be mitigated. She had built this empire herself after her husband Pierre had died in a helicopter crash 7 years ago. Grief had forged her into something harder, more brilliant, and infinitely more cautious. Her work was her armor, and her daughter Rosalind was the single, vulnerable, beating heart she kept hidden within it. When Mrs. Gable's call came through, the armor cracked. A man. "Looks homeless. Gave her something to eat." The words hit Geneviève like shrapnel. Her meticulously controlled world tilted on its axis. Every horror story she'd ever read, every security briefing she'd ever sat through, coalesced into a single terrifying image, her daughter, her Rosalind, in the hands of a predator. "Is she hurt?" Genevieve's voice was ice. She was already on her feet, her hand gesturing sharply to her executive assistant, who immediately began clearing her schedule. "No, ma'am, she seems fine." But he could have put something in that food. "I'm on my way," Geneviève cut her off. "Do not let him leave your sight. Call building security. Now." "He's already walking away, ma'am, with a little girl." The image solidified. A kidnapper using his own child as bait. It was a classic, disgusting tactic. "Get a description. Get a license plate. Do not engage. I have my own team en route," she commanded, her voice, leaving no room for argument. By the time her black-armored sedan slid silently to the curb at Crestwood Park, 2 of her personal security guards, both former Special Forces, were already there, flanking a still-trembling Mrs. Gable. Rosalind rushed into her mother's arms, burying her face in the expensive wool of her coat. Geneviève held her tight, her mind racing, performing a rapid threat assessment of her own child. No visible injuries, no signs of distress beyond the immediate chaos. "Mommy, it wasn't like that," Rosalind mumbled into her shoulder. "He was nice. We'll talk about it later, sweetie." Geneviève said, her voice soft for her daughter, but her eyes hard as diamonds as she looked at Mrs. Gable. "Report," the nanny, intimidated by the stony-faced guards, and her formidable employer stammered out her version of the events. It was a narrative coloured by her own panic and social prejudice. The man was unkempt, shifty-eyed, and had a beaten-up old car. He had lured Rosalind with food. The little girl he was with, Geneviève, asked her mind, already connecting dots, building a profile. Was she his? I assume so. She looked as scruffy as he did, Mrs. Gable said, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. Genevieve's jaw tightened. She despised incompetence. Mrs. Gable had failed at her one and only job to keep Rosalind safe. The nanny would be gone by the end of the day. But the man was a loose thread, a contamination in her controlled environment. He had touched her daughter. He had given her unvetted food. He knew what her daughter looked like. This was not a situation to be left to the slow, bureaucratic hands of the city police. This required the Dubois method, swift, silent, and overwhelmingly thorough. Back in her office with Rosalind, safely ensconced in the adjoining private suite, with a fresh meal and a movie, Genevieve made a call. The man who answered was Frank Miller. He was a discreet and brutally effective private investigator who had been on Genevieve's payroll for years. He handled sensitive corporate espionage cases, vetted high-level employees, and on rare occasions dealt with personal matters that required a touch the law couldn't provide. Frank, Genevieve said, her voice devoid of pleasantries. "I have a situation. A personal one." She relayed the details from the park, stripping them of Mrs. Gable's hysteria and presenting them as cold facts. "A man named Unknown approached my daughter in Crestwood Park at approximately 12:30 p.m. today. He was with a female child approximately 6 years old. He gave my daughter food. I want to know who he is. I want to know everything about him. His name, his address, his financials, his history, his associates. I want to know if he has a record. I want to know what he had for breakfast. I want to know if he is a threat." "Understood," Frank's gravelly voice replied. "I have the description from your security team. I'll start with traffic cams and facial recognition sweeps of the area. I'll have a preliminary report for you by morning." "I want more than that," Frank, Genevieve said, her gaze falling on a framed photo of Rosalind on her desk. "I want leverage. If this man is what I think he is, I will not just neutralize the threat. I will dismantle his entire existence so he can never ever be a danger to anyone again." For Genevieve Dubois, this wasn't an overreaction. It was sound risk management. The world was a dangerous place, and she would burn any part of it to the ground to keep her daughter safe. She had the resources, the power, and the cold, unyielding will to do it. The kind stranger from the park, Ethan Grant, had no idea that he and his daughter were now the subject of a multi-pronged investigation backed by near-limitless funds. He had no idea that his life was about to be put under a microscope. Every flaw, every mistake, every moment of hardship, magnified and weaponized against him. He had shared his lunch, and in doing so, had declared war on an empire he didn't even know existed. Frank Miller was a ghost. He moved through the digital and physical worlds with an unnerving seamlessness, leaving no trace of his passing. He was a master of data extraction, a connoisseur of human weakness. To him, a person was not a soul but a collection of data points, and he knew how to connect them. Ethan Grant's life, as fragile as it was an open book to a man like Miller. The starting point was the partial license plate Mrs. Gable had managed to jot down. It was for a 2008 Ford Focus, registered to one Ethan M. Grant. Address apartment 3B, 125 Oak Street, a rundown building on the far side of town. From there, the floodgates opened. By 9:00 a.m. the next morning, a sleek, encrypted file landed in Genevieve Dubois' inbox. The subject line was simply, "E. Grant, preliminary." Genevieve opened it, her expression unreadable. The report was clinical, devoid of emotion, a collection of facts that without context painted a damning picture. Subject Ethan Michael Grant, age 38, status widowed, deceased spouse Jenna Riley Grant. 2 years ago, ovarian cancer. Dependents Chloe Ann Grant, age 6, occupation freelance architect, unlicensed since firm closure 3 years prior. Sporadic income, currently in arrears on multiple accounts. Financials, mortgage on previous home, foreclosed 18 months ago. Outstanding medical debt, Jenna Grant, $112,250, sent to collections. Credit card debt, $28,700 across 3 major cards, all maxed out. Current bank balance, checking 482. Landlord at 125 Oak Street reports rent is 2 weeks late. Genevieve's eyes narrowed. The financial profile was one of extreme desperation. Desperate men did desperate things. Kidnapping for ransom was a common fantasy for the destitute. Miller's report continued. He had pulled Ethan's phone records. 12 calls a day to potential clients, most of them going unanswered. Calls to the bank, to the collection agencies. He had even pulled deleted text messages. One from Ethan to his late wife's sister read, "I don't know how I'm going to make rent, Karen. I'm smiling for Chloe, but I'm terrified." To a compassionate observer, it was a portrait of a grieving father struggling to stay afloat. To a paranoid mother and a ruthless CEO, it was a motive. The surveillance started that afternoon. A nondescript van parked down the street from Ethan's apartment. A bug, smaller than a ladybug, placed on the undercarriage of his Ford Focus. Miller's team was thorough. They documented Ethan's every move. 14:30. Subject leaves apartment with daughter. 14:45. Subject arrives at Thompson & Sons Construction. Meets with a Mr. David Thompson. 15:20. Subject exits meeting. Body language indicates disappointment. Miller's operative inside Thompson & Sons, a receptionist paid well for information, had already forwarded the context. Grant had pitched a brilliant, cost-effective design for a small community center. Thompson had been impressed, but their investors were skittish. No deal. The report Genevieve read that evening included a new, more troubling section. Psychological assessment, preliminary based on digital footprint. Subject shows signs of financial-induced stress and anxiety. History of arguments with medical billing departments. Notations of aggressive behavior on 2 calls based on internal call center notes Miller had illegally acquired. Deleted search history from his laptop recovered from his ISP included terms like quick cash jobs, sell plasma for money, and most chillingly, what is the ransom value for a child in the US? That last search was the nail in the coffin. Genevieve's blood ran cold. The context, of course, was missing. Ethan had been reading a news article about a famous historical kidnapping case and had clicked a link out of morbid curiosity. But to Genevieve sitting in her glass fortress, it was a smoking gun. This man wasn't just desperate. He was researching. He was planning. The encounter in the park wasn't a coincidence. It was reconnaissance. She called Frank Miller. "I want you to dig deeper. Talk to people. Neighbors. Former colleagues. I want to know if he has a history of instability. I want to build a case for what Miller asked, his voice flat. A case for whatever I need," she replied cryptically. "If he's a danger, I want him removed, legally if possible. If not, we'll discuss other options." Miller understood the subtext perfectly. The next phase of the investigation was more insidious. Miller's operatives, posing as market researchers and city surveyors, began canvassing Ethan's neighborhood. They spoke to his landlord, a grumpy man named Mr. Henderson. "Grant, he's quiet. Always pays, but late these last few months. Seems like a good dad, but who knows what goes on behind closed doors." They spoke to a neighbor, an elderly woman who complained about Chloe sometimes running in the hallway. "He seems overwhelmed, poor man. It's hard raising a child alone." Every piece of information was filtered through the lens of suspicion and sent back to Genevieve. Overwhelmed became unstable. Quiet became secretive. Late on rent became unreliable and desperate. The most damaging piece of information came from a former colleague at the large architectural firm where Ethan had worked before it downsized. Miller's operative, posing as a headhunter, bought the man a few drinks. Ethan Grant. "Yeah, I remember him. Brilliant designer, one of the best, but intense. After his wife got sick, he changed. got into a shouting match with one of the partners over a deadline, said the firm cared more about profits than people. They let him go a few months later. Said it was restructuring, but we all knew what it was. He became a liability. This was gold. Genevieve read the transcript, her theory solidifying. Ethan Grant was not just a desperate man. He was an unstable man, with a history of aggressive outbursts, a man who felt the world had wronged him. A man who might look at a wealthy family and feel entitled to a piece of their fortune. She sat back in her leather chair, the city lights twinkling below like a carpet of diamonds. She had the man's profile, his weaknesses, his pressure points. She had the narrative, a financially ruined, mentally unstable individual with a history of aggression who was now researching child abduction. The time for observation was over. It was time to act. The first tremor hit on a Friday. Ethan had a promising video call scheduled with a potential client in another state, a wealthy couple looking to build their dream retirement home. It was the biggest lead he'd had in months, a project that could clear his debts and give him breathing room for a year. He had spent a week preparing his designs, spread across the small dining table, his passion for his craft momentarily eclipsing his anxiety. 20 minutes before the call, he received an email. "Mr. Grant, we regret to inform you that we will be cancelling our scheduled meeting. After a preliminary background check, we've decided to move in a different direction. We wish you the best. A background check for a freelance architectural gig." It made no sense. He called them, but was sent straight to voicemail. He emailed, asking for clarification, but received no reply. The opportunity vanished into thin air, leaving behind the bitter taste of confusion and failure. The $500 payment he'd been expecting for the initial consultation, the money for the overdue rent, was gone. That was only the beginning. The world around Ethan began to subtly, poisonously turn against him. A few days later, he got a call from Chloe's school. The principal, a woman he'd always had a good relationship with, sounded formal and distant. "Mr. Grant, we received an anonymous call to our child welfare hotline today," she said, her voice strained. A concerned party reported some potential issues of neglect, specifically regarding Chloe's nutrition and your financial instability. Ethan felt the floor drop out from under him. "What, that's insane. Chloe is my entire world. She's happy, she's healthy." "I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding," the principal said, though she didn't sound sure at all. "But we are mandated reporters. We had to make a note of it in her file. A social worker may want to schedule a home visit. Just to be safe." A home visit. The words echoed in his head. They would see the threadbare furniture, the near-empty fridge he tried to disguise with creatively arranged condiments. They would see the stack of red-inked envelopes. They would see a struggling father and mistake him for a failing one. The fear of losing Chloe, a primal, gut-wrenching terror he hadn't felt since Jenna's diagnosis, seized him. Who would do this? Who would make such a cruel, baseless accusation? The pressure mounted. His landlord, Mr. Henderson, who had previously been gruff but understanding, suddenly became hostile. He left a formal eviction notice taped to their door, citing non-payment. When Ethan tried to talk to him, promising the money was coming, the landlord refused to even look him in the eye. "I heard things, Grant," he grumbled. "Trouble follows you. I want you out by the end of the month." Ethan felt like he was going crazy. It was as if a phantom was moving just ahead of him, poisoning every well, turning every friendly face against him. He felt watched. He would see the same nondescript van parked on his street for hours. He'd catch people looking at him in the grocery store, their whispers ceasing the moment he turned his head. His desperation grew. He sold his late wife's engagement ring, a betrayal that felt like a physical wound. It gave him enough cash to pay the rent and buy groceries for 2 weeks, but it was a temporary plug in a dam that was about to burst. The final blow came in the form of a crisp, cream-colored envelope that arrived by courier. It was from a law firm he'd never heard of, Sloane Decker and Pierce. The name itself sounded expensive and intimidating. His hands trembled as he opened it. It was not a lawsuit, but a cease and desist letter. It was worded in dense, threatening legalese, but the message was clear. It accused him of a pattern of harassment and stalking directed at a minor, Rosalind Dubois, and her family. It referenced the incident in Crestwood Park as the culmination of a period of targeted observation. It demanded he make no further attempt to contact or approach the Dubois family, and warned that any violation would result in immediate legal action, including criminal charges. Dubois. The name meant nothing to him. Rosalind, the little girl from the park. It all clicked into place with sickening clarity. The nanny's threats, the sudden inexplicable downturn in his fortunes, the anonymous call, the whispers. This wasn't a phantom. It was a person. A rich, powerful person who had misinterpreted his kindness as a threat and was now systematically destroying his life. He looked at the letterhead again. Sloane Decker and Pierce was one of the most powerful corporate law firms in the country. He searched the name Dubois online. The first result was a photo of a woman with severe, intelligent eyes and an aura of untouchable power. The caption read, Geneviève Dubois, CEO of Dubois Capital, a multi-billion-dollar private equity firm. The article detailed her ruthless business tactics, her immense wealth, and her fiercely private nature, especially concerning her only child, Rosalind, after the tragic death of her husband. Ethan stared at the screen, the scale of his predicament finally crashing down on him. He hadn't just angered a protective nanny. He had, through a simple act of kindness, made an enemy of a billionaire. A billionaire who thought he was a predator. A billionaire who had the power to erase him. He looked over at Chloe, who was sitting on the floor drawing a picture of a smiling sun and 2 stick figures holding hands, her and him, his world, and a woman he had never met from a world he could barely imagine was trying to tear it apart. The desperation he'd been feeling curdled into something new, the cold, defiant anger of a father with nothing left to lose. Geneviève Dubois did not make house calls. Her world was one of boardroom secure video conferences and intermediaries. But this was different. Frank Miller's file on Ethan Grant was now an inch thick, a comprehensive catalogue of a life teetering on the edge. The legal warnings had been sent. The social pressure had been applied. And yet Miller's surveillance reported that Grant, while clearly distressed, was not breaking. He was selling assets. He was still trying to find work. He was in essence fighting back. This persistence, this refusal to simply crumble and disappear, troubled Geneviève. It didn't fit the profile of a common criminal who would scare easily. She needed to see him, to look him in the eye, and take his measure for herself. It was the final step in her risk assessment. She arrived at 125 Oak Street on a grey Saturday morning. Her sleek black Maybach, chauffeured and followed by a discreet security vehicle, was as out of place in the neighborhood as a spaceship. The building's paint was peeling, and the air in the hallway smelled of dust and boiled cabbage. She wrinkled her nose in distaste, her expensive heels clicking on the cracked linoleum. She paused outside apartment 3B, took a deep, steadying breath, and knocked. The sound was sharp, authoritative. Ethan opened the door. He was holding a half-peeled potato and a paring knife. He looked tired, his eyes shadowed with sleeplessness, but when he saw her, a flicker of recognition, followed by a wave of weary anger, washed over his face. He knew exactly who she was. "Mr. Grant," she began, her voice, as cool and polished as the marble in her lobby. "I am Genevieve Dubois. I know who you are," he said, his voice low. He made no move to let her in, his body blocking the doorway. Chloe peeked around his leg, her eyes wide with curiosity. "You're the one who's been trying to ruin my life." Genevieve was taken aback by his directness. She had expected fear, perhaps denial. Not this quiet, contained fury. "I am the one who is protecting my daughter." She countered her gaze, unwavering. "Your behavior at the park was concerning. My subsequent investigation has revealed a deeply troubling profile." "Your investigation?" Ethan let out a short, incredulous laugh. "You mean your campaign of terror, anonymous calls to my daughter's school, scaring off my clients? Is that how you powerful people solve your problems, by crushing anyone you can't understand?" "I solve my problems by eliminating threats," she said, her voice dropping, becoming dangerously soft. "And a man with your financial desperation, your history of aggressive outbursts, and your recent research topics is a threat." Ethan stared at her, bewildered. "Research topics, aggressive outbursts. What are you talking about? Don't play games with me." "Mr. Grant, my sources are impeccable. I know about the incident at your old firm. I know about your debts. And I know you've been researching child abduction." The accusation was so monstrous, so far from reality, that for a moment Ethan was speechless. He felt a white-hot rage build inside him, but he looked down at Chloe, who was now clinging to his jeans, and forced it back down. "You've taken every hardship in my life and twisted it into something ugly," he said, his voice shaking with restrained emotion. "My wife died. She was sick for a long time. We had medical bills. I fought with a boss because he wanted me to miss one of her chemo appointments for a meeting. I'm struggling, yes. What single parent doesn't? But I am not a monster. I am a father. Something you of all people should understand." He stepped aside, a sudden, bold decision. "You want to see the threat? Come in. Come see the monster's lair." Hesitantly, Genevieve stepped inside. The apartment was small, cramped, and meticulously clean. It was sparsely furnished, but what little they had was well cared for. Children's drawings were taped to the walls. A half-finished architectural model, intricate and beautiful, sat on the coffee table, and everywhere, on every surface, were photographs of a smiling, vibrant woman with kind eyes. Jenna. The air was thick with a love and a grief that were palpable. This was not the den of a predator. It was a shrine to a lost wife and a sanctuary for a beloved child. Genevieve's carefully constructed certainty began to fracture. The data points from Frank Miller's reports, the cold, hard facts, had no soul. This room had nothing but. Just then, the door to the apartment across the hall opened, and a little girl with dark, curly hair peeked out. She had been on a play date. It was Rosalind. "Mommy," she said, her eyes widening as she saw the scene. "What are you doing here?" She ran past her mother and stopped in front of Ethan. Rosalind Genevieve said, her voice sharp with alarm. "Get back here!" But Rosalind ignored her. She looked up at Ethan, her grey eyes serious. "Did you get in trouble because of me?" she asked quietly. Before Ethan could answer, Chloe stepped forward. "My daddy shared his sandwich," she said, her small voice clear as a bell. "Because you were hungry. Sharing is nice." Rosalind turned to her mother, her expression pleading. "It's true, Mummy. He was nice. His little girl didn't have a whole sandwich, and he gave me his part. He didn't ask for anything. I told Mrs. Gable, but she wouldn't listen. You never listen." The last 3 words, spoken with the simple, brutal honesty of a child, struck Genevieve harder than any of Ethan's accusations. You never listen. She looked from her daughter's earnest face to Chloe's innocent one. She looked at Ethan, who stood there, not with menace, but with the profound, weary dignity of a man wrongly accused. And she looked at the photos of the smiling woman on the wall, a woman whose absence filled the entire room. In that moment, the entire narrative she had built, the entire case constructed by Frank Miller's soulless data, collapsed into dust. The report had shown her a man's debts, but it had not shown her his decency. It had shown her his struggles, but it had not shown her his love. She hadn't seen a desperate father. She had manufactured a villain because it was easier to fight a monster than to acknowledge a world where random acts of kindness still existed. The threat wasn't Ethan Grant. The threat was her own fear. The silence in the small apartment was heavy, broken only by the hum of the old refrigerator. Geneviève Dubois, a woman who commanded boardrooms and moved markets with a single word, was utterly adrift. The armor of her certainty was gone, and in its place was a raw, unfamiliar shame. She saw everything clearly now. The shifty-eyed man was just a tired father. The unkept clothes were the uniform of a man who put his daughter's needs before his own. The aggressive outburst at his old job was an act of love for his dying wife. The chilling internet search was a morbid curiosity, not a plan. She had taken a good, decent man and put him through hell. Her gaze fell upon the architectural model on the coffee table. It was a design for a building fluid and organic with wide-open spaces and an abundance of natural light. It was innovative, beautiful, and deeply human. "What is this?" she asked, her voice softer than Ethan had ever heard it. Ethan looked at the model, a flicker of his old passion returning. It was for a competition, a design for a new children's hospice and family center, a place for kids a place where families can be together without it feeling like a hospital. I didn't win. He shrugged. I didn't have the resources to build a proper presentation. Geneviève walked closer, her eyes tracing the elegant lines of the model. She saw not just a building, but a philosophy, a space designed around empathy, around comfort, around the preservation of dignity in the face of tragedy. It was a piece of architecture born from painful experience. It was a masterpiece. "Mr. Grant." She began turning to face him. Her usual composure was gone, replaced by a vulnerability that startled him. I have made a terrible mistake. There is no excuse for my actions, only an explanation. When my husband died, the world became a landscape of threats to me. My fear for Rosalind, it blinded me. I saw a monster where there was only a man, a better man than I have been a woman. The apology, so direct and unconditional, disarmed him completely. "I can't undo the damage I've done," she continued, her voice thick with regret. "The fear I've caused you, the opportunities I've cost you. A check would be an insult to you. But I must try to make this right." She paused, looking from the model back to his face. "The Dubois Foundation is the primary benefactor for the new National Pediatric Center. The current architectural plans are adequate, uninspired. They were designed by a committee. This," she said, gesturing to his model, "is what it should be. This is a building with a soul." Ethan stared at her, not daring to comprehend what she was suggesting. "I am firing the current firm effective immediately," Geneviève stated, the CEO in her, re-emerging. But this time, it was a force for creation, not destruction. "I want to commission you, Mr. Grant. I want you to build this. Your design, your vision, our funding. We will give you a proper studio, a team, whatever resources you need. This is not charity. Your talent is undeniable, and I want it for my project. You've earned this." Ethan was stunned into silence. For months, his life had been a series of closing doors. He had been fighting just to survive his dreams of actually creating, of building something meaningful, long since packed away. And now this woman, his tormentor, was offering him not just a lifeline, but the dream itself. He looked at Chloe, who was now holding hands with Rosalind, the two of them whispering and giggling, their worlds already merged. He thought of Jenna and how proud she would have been. He thought of all the sleepless nights, the gnawing fear, the humiliation. And he realized that holding on to his anger would only continue the damage. "Okay," he said, his voice hoarse. He cleared his throat. "Yes, I accept." A small, genuine smile touched Genevieve's lips for the first time. It transformed her face, softening the severe lines and revealing a hint of the woman she might have been before grief had remade her. "There is one more thing," she said, turning to the two girls. "Rosalind, you were very brave to tell the truth, even when you were scared. I am very proud of you. And I am very sorry that I didn't listen. That will change." She then knelt down to Chloe's level. "And Chloe, your father is a very kind man. You were right. Sharing is nice. It's a lesson I need to relearn." She hesitated, then added, "I hear you're an expert on frozen banana ice cream. Perhaps you and Rosalind can teach me how to make it sometime." Chloe's face lit up. "With sprinkles." "With all the sprinkles in the world," Genevieve promised. It wasn't a magical fix. The scars of the past few weeks wouldn't vanish overnight. But in that small, humble apartment, something new was being built. A bridge was being constructed across the vast chasm of wealth, fear, and misunderstanding. It was a structure built not of steel and glass, but of a child's simple honesty, a father's quiet dignity, and a mother's humbling, transformative apology. 3 months later, Ethan Grant stood on a dusty construction site, a roll of blueprints tucked under his arm. The sun was warm on his face, and the air was filled with the sounds of creation, the rumble of machinery, the shouts of workers, the clang of steel on steel. Behind him, the skeleton of the new pediatric center was rising from the earth, its form already echoing the grace and compassion of his model. His life had been utterly transformed. He now ran his own small, dedicated studio, funded by a generous advance from the Dubois Foundation. The weight of debt was gone, replaced by the invigorating pressure of a meaningful deadline. He had a new apartment in a better neighborhood with a small yard where Chloe could play. But the biggest change was not financial. The fear that had been his constant companion was gone, replaced by a quiet confidence and a renewed sense of purpose. He was no longer just a survivor. He was an architect again. Genevieve Dubois was a frequent visitor to the site. She arrived not in her Maybach, but in a functional SUV, trading her heels for a pair of hard-soled boots. The project had changed her too. It had become her passion, a way to build a legacy of compassion rather than just profit. She spent less time in her 88th floor office and more time on the ground, learning the names of the foremen, understanding the challenges of the construction, and seeing firsthand how Ethan's vision was being translated into reality. Their relationship had evolved into a strange and powerful friendship, built on a foundation of mutual respect. They were two single parents from two different universes who had collided violently and found a common ground in their shared love for their children and their shared experience of loss. They talked about Pierre and Jenna, sharing stories and memories, finding comfort in the simple act of being understood. The girls, Chloe and Rosalind, had become inseparable. The loneliness that had clung to Rosalind like a shadow had dissipated, replaced by Chloe's infectious laughter. Their playdates were a regular occurrence, alternating between the manic energy of public playgrounds and the quiet, cavernous spaces of Genevieve's mansion. They had, as promised, taught Genevieve how to make frozen banana ice cream. She had been surprisingly terrible at it, covering the kitchen and herself in a fine dusting of cocoa powder and sprinkles, much to the girls' delight. For the first time in years, the sound of genuine, unrestrained laughter echoed through her silent home. One sunny Saturday afternoon, they all found themselves back where it had started Crestwood Park. This time there was no single sad sandwich. Instead, a large checkered blanket was laden with a feast-roast chicken salads, fresh fruit, and a whole chocolate cake. Ethan watched as Chloe and Rosalind ran laughing toward the swings, their hands clasped together. Genevieve sat beside him on the blanket, a rare, relaxed smile on her face. "Do you ever think about that day?" she asked quietly, her gaze following the girls. "Every day," Ethan admitted. "Sometimes I still can't believe it. How close I came to losing everything. I was so wrong," she said, her voice filled with the lingering echo of her old shame. "My fear built a prison for me and Rosalind. You and your daughter, and your half of a sandwich. You gave us the key." He looked at her, at this woman who had once been his faceless, terrifying adversary, and saw only a friend, a partner, a fellow traveler on the difficult road of life. "You know," he said, a small smile playing on his lips. "My design for the center, the main entrance hall. I based the acoustics on the sound of a child's laughter. The light from the skylights is designed to hit the floor at the exact angle the sun hits this park bench in the early afternoon." Genevieve turned to him, her eyes wide with surprise and understanding. "It's not just a building, Genevieve," he explained. "It's a monument to second chances, to the idea that sometimes the very worst day of your life can be the foundation for the very best." She looked from his face to the two laughing girls, and then to the vast blue sky. For the first time in a very long time, her world did not feel like a collection of assets and liabilities. It felt like a blueprint full of hope, possibility, and the promise of a beautiful shared future. The story of Ethan and Genevieve reminds us that we live in a world of invisible blueprints. We all have a story, a private architecture of struggle, grief and hope that shapes who we are. But too often we only see the exterior. We judge the frayed jeans, the fancy car, the tired eyes, and we build a narrative based on our own fears and assumptions. Ethan's simple act of sharing his last meal was an act of profound empathy. He saw a hungry child, not a social status. And Genevieve's ultimate choice to demolish her own walls of fear to see the man behind her data is a powerful lesson in humility. Their story is a testament to the fact that kindness is not a transaction. It's a foundation. It's the strongest material we have to build bridges over the deepest divides. If this story touched your heart and made you think, please let us know in the comments below. What would you have done in Ethan's or Genevieve's position? Every act of kindness, big or small, has the power to change a life. You can change ours by hitting that like button, sharing this story with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribing to our channel for more real-life stories that inspire and move you. Thank you for listening.